It's pretty amazing to me, honestly, just looking at all this stuff about mental health stigma in 2025. Like, you'd think with all the awareness now, things would be different, but these sources are painting a picture that it's still a huge problem.
Yeah. We talk a lot about awareness these days, but this deep talk's really about going deeper, right? Seeing if that's actually translated into less stigma.
Mhm.
And from what I'm seeing in these reports, it's like we've got a lot more work to do.
I mean, it makes you wonder, right? Like, why? Why is stigma so stubborn even with all this progress? What's keeping it around?
Well, one thing that keeps coming up in these studies is that even though people are more aware of mental health, they don't really understand it.
Meaning, like, they don't really get what causes it or
Yeah, exactly. Like there's this one report that found more than half the people they talk to still believe those old myths about mental illness.
like the ones that say it's all in your head or that,
Right, or that it's a sign of weakness, or, that people with mental health conditions are dangerous,
yeah.
which isn't true, by the way.
No, not at all. And I bet the media doesn't help with that. Like, how many times have we seen that same old story where someone with mental illness is the villain?
All the time.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating because even when they're trying to be sensitive, those portrayals often end up reinforcing those same harmful stereotypes.
And it makes you wonder if those stereotypes become like self-fulfilling prophecies in a way.
It's definitely possible. If
Okay.
people are constantly being told they're a certain way, they might start to believe it themselves.
Yeah.
And that can lead to people not seeking help because they're ashamed or afraid of being judged.
Which is exactly what we don't want. And speaking of judgment, our sources also talk about this thing called structural stigma.
Ah, yes. Structural stigma. This is a big one. It's basically about how these systems and structures in our society can actually disadvantage people with mental health conditions.
So it's like built-in discrimination.
Exactly. It could be things like, insurance companies not covering mental health care as well as they cover physical health care,
Hmm.
or employers being reluctant to hire someone with a mental health condition.
Or landlords not renting to people with mental health conditions.
Exactly. All of those things create barriers for people with mental health conditions
Yeah.
and make it harder for them to live full and productive lives.
And then on top of all that, there's self-stigma.
Right. Yeah. Self-stigma is this really insidious thing where people internalize all that negative stuff that society throws at them and start to believe it about themselves.
So they basically become their own worst enemy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It can lead to people feeling ashamed or like they're not worthy of help.
So what's the impact of all this stigma? What are the real-world consequences?
Well, for one thing, it makes people less likely to seek treatment. They're afraid of being labeled or discriminated against, so they wait until things are really bad.
And by then it's probably harder to treat, right?
Absolutely. And sometimes people will start treatment, but then stop because of the stigma. They're worried about what people will think, or they don't want to have to explain themselves all the time.
And I imagine all of this has a huge impact on people's quality of life.
Absolutely. It affects their work, their relationships, their ability to take care of themselves. It can really make it hard to function in the world.
And it probably doesn't help that mental health services are often underfunded.
No, it doesn't. The stigma surrounding mental health definitely plays a role in that. People don't want to put money into something that they see as shameful or unimportant.
It's like we're still treating mental health as a second-class citizen compared to physical
It
health.
really is. And that needs to change.
So are there any efforts being made to address this stigma?
Oh, yeah. There are actually a lot of great initiatives happening right now.
Like what?
Well, for one thing, there's a big push for public education. You know, trying to get accurate information out there and combat those harmful stereotypes.
And are they working with the media on this?
They are. They're trying to encourage more responsible portrayals of mental illness in movies and TV shows.
So maybe we'll start seeing fewer villains with mental health conditions.
Hopefully. And there are also efforts to create more supportive policies in workplaces, schools, and other institutions.
So that people feel safe to talk about their mental health and seek help if they need it.
Exactly. That's the goal.
It sounds like there's some real progress happening. But it's kind of discouraging that stigma is still such a big problem in 2025.
Yeah, it just goes to show how deep-seated these beliefs are. And it means we have to keep working to change them.
And it's not just about changing laws and policies, right? It's about changing hearts and minds.
Absolutely. We need to create a culture where people with mental health conditions feel supported and valued, and where they can get the help they need without shame or fear.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's clear that mental health stigma is still very much alive and well in 2025.
Sadly, it is.
But there are people out there fighting to change that. And it makes me wonder, what can we do as individuals to challenge those stigmas in our own lives and communities?
That's a great question.
Yeah,
And it's one we all need to be thinking about.
it really is food for thought.
Indeed.
Thanks for joining me today for this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
And thanks to all of you for listening. We'll see you next time.
See you then.